Does anybody here have any questions about that? My name is Marty Perlmutter, and I have inhaled. But I stopped inhaling in India in 2012, and so I'm really the wrong guy to moderate this thing. But I'm here, and I will help facilitate, and since I'm straight, it'll be pretty efficient. We have 44 minutes. I want to save like 15 minutes for questions, because you're going to have questions. So, in this domain of print, online, and video, streamed and broadcast, we have a tsunami of interest and activity. It's just beginning, big as it is. I overheard somebody say at the same podium that something like 90% of Californians, pretty close to 90, have never been into a pot dispensary. So we're really at the virginal, tender beginnings of what is going to be, I think, vastly bigger than any other business in California, except maybe integrated circuits, and I think we'll beat that in time. So, with no further ado, let's start talking to folks here. What order, do you guys have a preference on who goes first?
That way it is.
You might be good.
Okay.
That one, okay, yeah, we're going with this.
Testing.
Hi. Katie is from Civilized Studios, so don't be fooled. And she has made hundreds of things that have popped up in our social media feeds. Tell us all about it.
So I'm Katie Labrie. I'm the EVP of Civilized Studios, which is the video production arm of Civilized, which is a digital media company in the cannabis lifestyle space. You're absolutely right. I have done hundreds of videos that have likely popped up in your Facebook or Instagram feeds. We launched about 2 years ago. We are an editorial site, so we have a very sort of robust editorial. We're doing 10, 12 original articles a day for the site, but we launched the studio to start supporting that content with video, which, as we all know, is, you know, the king of the castle these days and the best way to draw an audience to your site. So we did that for a long time. I hope you, if you are not following us, I hope you all pull out your phones and follow us on Facebook and Instagram right now. So yeah, I started this, I've been in it for about 2 years, and lots more to come in the coming years.
Is there anything you can tell us about, you know, planned innovation in distribution?
Well, you know, it's interesting. We have some interesting challenges in the cannabis media space in that there are some limitations to, you know, who will pick up our content. I come from a very traditional background. Before I joined Civilized, I was in daytime television for 8 years. Yeah, so we did talk shows, game shows, court shows. I got in at a really good time, just as Oprah was leaving. So we saw our ratings in that space really decimalize, and so we moved on to a more branded content model, branded entertainment model, to monetize that entire space, and it met with great success. So for me, I think what I see the future for us at Civilized, but I also think a really interesting opportunity for every single person on this panel, is really finding ways to bring branded entertainment, and I use the word entertainment as distinct from content, because I think we really need to entertain and engage, inform, and educate audiences about, you know, the industry, the people involved in it, and what we do. But I see that as becoming the driving force behind our content in the coming years.
Exciting, great. There'll be questions, I'm sure, about that. Great. David Beanstalk, you a weed guru? What's that mean?
That is not a title I would self-apply, but sure. My name's David Bienenstock. I've been covering cannabis as a journalist for 15 years. Some of you may be shocked to know cannabis has been around that long. It's actually about 10,000 years. I've only been here for 15. I was an editor at High Times. I've been a freelancer with Vice and Leafly. I was the co-producer of the web series Bong Appetit that's now on Viceland. I'm not doing that anymore. And I have a new podcast called Great Moments in Weed History with Abdullah and Bean. I'm Bean, not Abdullah. And yeah, I think that my role is really to report and to create media around cannabis in a way that appeals to people who already love cannabis and explains to people who are new, and I love both those groups of people.
Lovely, and we'll talk about branded stuff later. Okay, Amanda Chicago Lewis, please begin by telling us about your name. Where'd you get the middle name?
Yeah, my older sister's name is Ariane, which is French, and so for her middle name, my parents wanted her to have a real middle American name, and Kansas is in the middle of America, so they named her Ariane Kansas. I'm Amanda Chicago, and my brother is Sam Wyoming.
Thank you. As you can tell, she's a reporter, and she can keep her facts straight, and she works for, what's your thing called? Oh yeah, Rolling Stone? Right. Please, discourse. What do you report on?
What's that?
What are you reporting on in Rolling Stone?
Yeah, I'm a journalist. I don't make branded content. I am more on the investigative side. I write a column that comes out twice a month for Rolling Stone. I write for a couple of other magazines, and before that I was a national reporter at BuzzFeed News, and before that I wrote for LA Weekly. I've been writing about cannabis for about 5 years, so not quite as OG as David, but yeah.
Cool. All right, great. You'll be able to answer some of our factual questions. All right. Alex Campbell is a documentarian, but I believe you have other credits. You did something called
Super High Me was the name of my film. I made it 12 years ago, and I think it was the first time a lot of people ever heard the word medical in front of marijuana in the culture. After that, I got involved politically and started working with a man named Richard Lee in Oakland and helped start Oak Stream University. And then we put Proposition 19 on the ballot in 2010 and were raided by the feds subsequently to that. Still the largest rate of medical marijuana dispensary by anybody in the U.S. government, 125 federal agents. No indictments were ever brought out against us. And then after some of that adventure, I decided to make a sequel to my film Super High Me, and Doug Benson sued me, and then he subsequently lost in court after a 2-year battle and hundreds of thousands of dollars, and now the film will be coming out. The sequel to Super High Me will come out later this year, direct to streaming. I believe the media, internet is incredibly important in terms of cannabis legalization. Most people under the age of 30 think cannabis is legal because it's so widely talked about on the internet, but it's not yet.
Great. We'll talk about that. Good. Josh Otten is the CCO. Does that have to do with cryptocurrency?
Could be. We deny it.
With please.
Chief Content Officer and co-founder at Prohibited. We've been around for about 4 years. We focus on lifestyle and content and culture. We're not really in the news business as much as we are as creating really cool, great IP, intellectual property, content, entertainment, and focusing around talent and on fun formats. We have distribution on Apple TV, Roku, Amazon Prime. We have partnerships with Entrepreneur Magazine and Advertising Week, and we're also have distribution outputs with places like Daily Motion and MetaCafe. So you can pretty much find our content on our channels and anywhere you need to go on digital or OTT at this point.
Outstanding. That's great. So this is a food chain, right? You got that. This is everything from independent operators to to people who are embedded already. Brian Weiss, he does something really cool, and something that our web history suggests is really the smart way to go. He is a localized guy. He does cannabis news for LA.
Yeah, my name is Brian Weiss, and I'm the founder of LA Cannabis News. LA Cannabis News has just launched about 4 months ago. Our website launched on 4/20, and it's the first localized cannabis news in the country. There is no localized cannabis news in any city and anywhere in the country, so it's exciting. I cover all the daily news. I have an event page, there's a jobs board and a resource directory. It's very much common sense stuff. It's just I was looking for something to invest in the cannabis space, and I searched hundreds of different periodicals and different things to find what I was looking for, and I couldn't find anything, so I decided to create what I couldn't find. So that's what I do. Thank you.
So this is great. We have 3 journalists in the space, 3 and 2 producers of content, crossing a range actually from the more radical, I would say. Would you agree, Amanda? The crazy stuff, to to the social. I mean, it's injected through social media to Entrepreneur Magazine, and we have a serious. I would call you more than a documentarian. You're a cannabitarian. So, let's get into this. What's going to be the motive force on the media side in the next, let's take 18 months, right? We're at a cusp. Something, we got a repressive, regressive federal government still. Things will change, I think, in Congress November 6th, but we won't see anything until 2019. Then we're going to be stuck in the next electoral cycle, right? So nothing's going to change till 2020. What do we do in the meanwhile? We have dispensaries, but sometimes they get raided. We have local or state legalization, but we have the opposition in the feds. We have no access to the federal monetary system, the ACH system that clears our checks and credit cards. How do we move the industry forward? How do we create a wave, if you will, of legitimization in people's minds? What do we do? Is there a strategy? I mean, each of you can prosper doing what you are doing separately. She's going to keep her job at Rolling Stone. You're going to keep making little crazy things that turn up in my Instagram feed. But how do we, as a coordinating, sort of consensually interested group, push what we know ought to happen? How do we do that? What can we do? I ask these questions at political meetings too, and I get the same response.
Well, I'm not an activist, so I'm not part of whatever movement you're trying to push, but I would say I disagree with the concept that nothing is going to change. Congress is about to formally legalize CBD and basically every cannabinoid except for THC, so I disagree with that premise.
Good. All right, I agree with that. Who on your side do you think, I mean, CBD is going to come, right? There's a lot of talk about that.
Well, look, I think everything comes down to money. This is America. People like to make money here, and activism is very important, and we have to, I personally want to make sure that people who were incarcerated and for nonviolent crimes who are sometimes still rotting away in jail don't have second chances. I think that's really important for what I look around to do as a community. In terms of us as a cannabis community, people that operate in the space, I think it's important to sort of figure out how to help those that essentially took the first brunt and the biggest brunts. But in terms of how quickly it's going to happen, look, we're losing ground war internationally in Canada every day. They're federally legal there. They have a federal mandate. They're publicly traded. You have 5 companies that are worth over $1 billion in market cap. So when we start to realize that we're just losing lots of money in ground share, I think that's what powers everything on political and Congress and lobbyists. So it's a matter of time. When that happens, I think the biggest challenge is going to be what happens if we're saying CBD is going to be legal. Does that mean that if you use it in a product, you have to get FDA testing? Does that mean you can't claim efficacy of it? Does that mean that you're going to have to do triple trials, and then all of a sudden, if you want to have a CBD whatever, it's going to cost you $1 million to go to market? So there's a whole bunch of questions where sometimes the rush to say, oh, well, we got to mandate this now or get it, the regulations around it become challenging. You have FCC, FTC, ATF, a DEA, all the alphabets will have all of their FDA. Yeah, they're all going to touch it. And they're going to want to have say on it. So to be honest, it's like there's this yin and yang of the minute that they get involved, all the stuff that we do, whether it's content and brand sponsored, has to be looked at differently, or if you're making a CBD product, it's going to have to be potentially marketed differently and all this other stuff. And on the flip side, the longer we wait, the more people are losing businesses and jobs, and so,
Yep.
Yeah.
So we're actually a Canadian-held company at Civilized, so for us, it's all about to happen. We've been promised for several months. July 1st was the date. It's getting pushed, but really we're going federally legal. In typical Canadian fashion, though, it's not going to be a direct blueprint for what's going to happen in the U.S. because they are very regulation heavy. And even though they're allowing each province to make some decisions, it's not the same sort of state-by-state system that we're looking at here. But I do think that looking north of the border is very, very interesting for those of us who are storytellers. In not the way, step away from the legislation for a minute, step away from the politics, but let's start talking about, how cannabis is affecting, will affect, and can affect people's lives. And in Canada, we're about to see a whole population of people who now have access who never had before, who now are going to have curiosities and experiences that they've never had before. And we're going to see a lot of people coming out of what we've sort of long called the cannabis closet, where they may have been consumers or patients, for whatever reason, but wouldn't talk about it openly. And so we were losing those stories. We weren't hearing them. Now now with this sort of new freedom to talk about it, I'm hoping that we're going to see a lot more stories emerge, and what that will do will expand the narrative, and then some of that stigma that we always talk about will start to alleviate, because we're telling a ton of different stories from a ton of different perspectives. Some are funny, some are sad, some are inspiring, some are moving, some are life-changing, some are, you know, just stupid comedy bits. But either way, we're finally going to be allowed to talk about it and with the words that we want to use.
That's great. From the producer side, from the creative side, that's really thrilling. And however that's packaged. You have any thoughts on that, Brian? I mean, that's in your zone, right?
Can I jump in on that?
Yes, please.
I wanted to make a quick distinction. I consider myself an advocacy journalist. That's actually a very long tradition that I'm proud to be a part of. I think the laws against cannabis are not only incredibly damaging, they're just stupid. And I've been trying to make that point through journalism for 15 years. I think the role of a journalist remains the same, though. You report. I think when we talk about where we go culturally, that's where the media can have a very big impact. And we need to think of cannabis as a culture. We need to think of it as a culture that's been oppressed.
Yeah.
Okay? And that's not to compare one form of oppression to another, but when 800,000 people a year are getting arrested in this country alone, when people have their children taken away, when people are put in prison, when mass incarceration has been driven by this drug war, that's the oppressive side of this culture we're trying to come out of. There's also a beautiful side of this culture that is about art and community, and that has not been well represented in the media, just as we've seen other cultures go through this process of trying to have some control over your own portrayal in the media. That's what's very important to me right now. That's where I think the media can play a huge role. With my partner, Abdullah Saeed, I started this podcast, Great Moments in Weed History, because we feel like people are coming in now, and events like this are wonderful, and hearing from the mainstream is wonderful, but if we don't represent the actual history of this culture, then we're just going to surrender it. People went to the mat for this. People gave up their freedoms for this. People are our cultural heroes who pushed for access so that cancer patients don't get arrested for smoking a joint. Or Willie Nelson smoked a joint on the roof of the White House was our first episode. We should be proud of that. We're outlaws. Even if the laws change, we don't want to lose that understanding of ourselves. And sometimes I see portrayals in the media of this culture that are so off from that, that are so divorced from the reality of what I understand cannabis culture to be, and they're not working, okay? I'm not going to point any fingers at specific shows because maybe the person who made it is here.
Disjointed.
Okay, you get but it's like that's not gonna, not only is that a bad thing to do, it's not going to work. Nobody wants it. So I think the moment we're at now is where I hope people are looking for authenticity.
Yeah, that's the word.
Because that's what we deserve, and that's what will be supported in the marketplace.
That's totally good.
I feel like we lost something by the legitimization, you know? I do, and I'm with you.
We were always legitimate. It's like prohibition was illegitimate. Putting people in a cage for a wonderful plant is illegitimate. I'm going to step down from my soapbox.
But I have a follow-up question about that. You know, how do we preserve in what's coming, however the timeline works out? How do we preserve that artistic, expressive, rebellious reality and protect it?
Well, I don't know if you can. I mean, look, and I agree with everything you said, but I don't know if you can do both in a certain way, meaning this, like, if, you know, I surround myself with people who are probably on the average of 23, 24 years old to make content because I'm a 42-year-old married white cis male, and, you know, I'm not making content for me. I'm trying to hire and get these teams together that are speaking to a younger generation. And they do not self-identify cannabis consumption as a self-identity. It is not, it's a generational thing. So when I went out and I was in school and I smoked a joint, there was a group of kids that got high, and there was the group of kids that didn't get high, and then you kind of didn't intermingle. And I look at the 20-year-olds today, and I would, we're at almost 40 people, and if you look at them, they all, I would say probably 90% of the people in our offices smoke, and you wouldn't be able to tell who's the smoker, who's not. And if you ask them, what part of their identification was cannabis, a cannabis consumer is actually pretty low on the line in terms of self-identification, whether it's gender or sexual. So I'm just saying, like, there's all these things. So weed has just happened to be this thing that they consume. On the adult use side, on the medical side, it's a totally different conversation, because then you're talking about a medicine that's helping people. But so I think it's interesting, because the question is, how do we normalize something? How do we make it so that everyone can accept it? And part of that may be just to say, well, whatever, we could all be having this conversation and smoke. I'd probably be having not a good one, but whatever, not as coherent. But the point is to have that conversation. Or do we have this rebelliousness and still pay homage to the sort of past? So it's interesting. It's a challenge on the content side to figure out how to sort of meet both those things.
It is interesting. I mean, now that we face this new and radical normalization.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting, because civilized is very similar to prohibited, except for we cater to an older audience. So even though I'm of your generation, I don't have a bunch of kids running around well, I have a couple. They're here right now, probably filming this in the back. But I think it's interesting. I think, David's absolutely right. There is this history, this sort of, and it's what gives this industry, for me as a storyteller, that's where the meatiness is. Like, that's where, not to use a really horrible word, but gravitas, but that's where it's all there. So I think whether you're speaking to a sort of an older sort of PBS crowd like mine, or sort of a younger, hipper audience, I think there's still a way to sort of weave into the fabric, like the legacy and the history and the stuff that comes before it. But you're absolutely right, it's challenging, because in our society, they're like, they're Uber and they're Postmates, and they're like, can you please get me my weed that way too? And there's no kind of sense of what had to happen for them now to have that ability to do that.
Thanks, Katie. Good point. Alex, as an encyclopedist, do you have something to say about this normalization?
Well, like I said, I think most people under the age of 30 think cannabis is illegal. They don't realize it's illegal.
Not if you live in Oklahoma.
No, but I know that. But even
but you don't think it, because you're still looking over your shoulder.
Right, and I think that leads to the problem that we have in trying to talk about media, is that you have a population where it's partially illegal, and then you have a population where it's legal, and so I think that becomes part of the problem. But I will say, I want to disagree with one thing you said at the beginning, is that things are changing. The East Coast is about to fall. Massachusetts is going legal shortly. Yeah. Vermont is going legal. Not medical, legal.
Yeah.
So, and then New Jersey, the new governor is going to go legal there.
Yeah.
They're going to push it through, and that's hugely significant. That's going to happen before 2020.
Well, and Gavin Newsom, I believe, is going to get elected here as our governor, and he's a wild and crazy guy. That'll push some things, but still, it's troublesome to me that we're sort of stuck in a way, and will be for a bit, between this rebel culture, the origins, and the mythology of that, and those who think it's legal and presume it's always been legal. And because one thing that gets lost in there is an equity issue, which is those millions of people who lost their voting rights or lost 10 or 15 years in jail because they had a load in their Volkswagen bus and they got popped. What about that? That's lost in the cracks, isn't it?
That'll change in time.
When I think one point too is it's important to make is, like, there's a lot that the quote mainstream can learn from us. It's not this street where we're waiting for them to give us their values. Neither political party was a part of this resistance. We were a successful resistance movement. Yep. This was a huge government operation to oppress people and put them in prison, and we're stopping it. And we did that as a completely grassroots movement. Big business wasn't a part of it. Neither political party really backed it. There was all of this buy-in to make a profit off the existing system. So let's reintroduce ourselves as a successful model of resistance, and one that, thank you, cut across. You know, you can have that punk rock kid and that hip hop kid and somebody who grew up in farm country, and we've all had this in common. You know, it cuts across all these cultures, and we won. And people should really, if you really want to make change in this country and in this world, we need to start looking at this as a successful model of taking on entrenched interests and taking on the oppressive elements in our society, and not just talking about it, but winning. We're fucking winning.
Yeah.
And I take a lot of pride in that. And if you're new to this, just be humble that you're new, and look to contribute.
Well, yeah, I think the origination of fake news was the media demonizing cannabis, literally. I mean, you know, it's like if you look at, you know, we talk about 1906 as a date in our company sort of mythos, and the idea being that 1906 was the first Food and Drug Act that was ever passed, and the idea was, you know, you would get these little bottles of, you know, old-timey medicines, and the one effective ingredient they kept putting into it was cannabis. And of course Bayer had heroin, and there was cocaine and all the other fun drugs. But the point is, they started controlling it then, and then it just, it sounds like a conspiracy theory when you talk about it too much. You kind of, everyone starts putting their tinfoil hat on because you bring in Hearst and you bring in, you know, yellow journalism, and then you have to look at what happened in World War II with legalizing hemp because the government knew it was, you know, it could work, and then they demonize it again. And so you realize, you know, again, when you're talking to a wider audience, it does sound a little InfoWars, but it's true. I mean, the reality is that the government was highly incentivized, and local police forces were highly incentivized to essentially arrest and prosecute and, you know, use it as either a weapon, you know, starting with Nixon against people of color, or, you know, to just fund local police forces. And so, you know, when you had a choice as a cop and you could, you know, sort of take people's stuff, well, your local meth addict and your local crackhead or whatever else they wanted to call them didn't have enough stuff, but the guy who was, you know, had weed, or the person that was, you know, was a lot of times successful business owners, and they had property and money and cars and things they could take.
Yeah.
So.
So what's coming now, of course, will be an issue in the CBD area, in the medical area, about monetization on the pharmaceutical side and control, right? That's coming. And so whatever else happens in terms of legalization and national legalization and clearances of finance and all that stuff, we're going to go through a thing where the big pharma is going to grab CBDs in all likelihood, and they're going to price it accordingly, and we're going to be paying $300 for a little tube of salve in a couple of years. Anybody have any thoughts about that? And how
I disagree with you.
Resist or change that?
I think that whole plant medicine is far superior, and the marketplace will make that determination.
Okay. So
And the fact is that California is just coming online right now. The price of cannabis is going to drop tremendously.
Right.
And that's, you know, you're going to grow hemp, and that's where all CBD comes from. And people are also going to wise up that they're buying CBD right now, and it's like modern day snake oil. It doesn't, CBD doesn't do that much without THC or the other, the entourage effect. So I don't think it's going to be, I don't think it's going to come. And they may try to do that, but I think in the end the marketplace will defeat that.
So beyond the advocacy stuff, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I think Amanda dropped like a little news bomb and then walked away from it about CBD.
Well, I think anyone who's paying attention to the legislation that McConnell is about to push through, it's not like a news bomb. People know that it's happening, right?
I thought maybe you know a little more than I do. Or...
You mean I read the bill? It's publicly available. In case you're not aware, Mitch McConnell, who's a very powerful Republican, is about to push through some legislation that will ultimately legalize hemp. And as maybe you are aware or not aware, basically hemp is defined as anything that's, you know, less than 0.3% THC, and there's all these other cannabinoids out there. And so once we legalize hemp for commercial uses, we're probably going to see even more CBD in more corporate ways than what you're already seeing at your local health food, you know, store, which is ignoring the laws, and because they're not being enforced, so who cares? And there's CBD products everywhere, but there's going to be even more CBD products, and it'll help, the economy in Kentucky, and that's what's going to happen.
Yeah, you're going to see a bifurcation where you're going to see pharma take it and patent probably compounds around it and delivery mechanics and all the other sort of things that they'll try to create patents around CBD. And then you'll have more of the nutraceutical movement where you're going to look at the sort of GMC methodology of, tiptoeing around efficacy and whether it's, what the actual dosage is, and as you point out, the entourage effect for efficacy and all the other sort of issues. Some of it's going to be snake oil and branding and packaging, and just like every other product that you can buy, whether it's protein shakes or whatever, thistle, milk thistles. So I think you're going to see that as well, and I'm personally really excited about the opportunity for actual science to sort of get in and dig into the entire plant and figure out the best ways to do it. And if that means that some pharmaceutical company ends up patenting a piece of that, but they can find cures or things that can, sort of help illnesses, so be it. I think there's always going to be a whole plant movement as well, and we'll have access to both of them.
So part of the media role will, I think, be helping both newbies and people who consider themselves knowledgeable and long-term, if you will, strugglers in the domain, understand the range of offerings. This is from the local news beat to the national, regulation and pharmaceutical industry and patenting activities. How do you folks in media of various kinds, addressing audiences in this area, help people understand what's coming? The patenting, limiting, and monetization of certain kinds of treatments, cures for really serious disease. The ranges of product, I remember we used to eat 5 brownies at a time. You'll die now if you do that.
That is absolutely not true. Unless there's poison in the brownie, you're not going to die.
So there's a lot of educating that needs to be done.
You'll be under a table for 6 hours, but you won't technically die.
The story used to be legal, illegal, rebel, conformist, or straight. And then it got a little more gray, right? And now there's really a spectrum. There's really a lot of color, and media could help people parse out, understand, grok not just cultural stuff and struggle issues and legal rights and restitution of voting rights and stuff like that, but other things that have to do with how do I get stoned, and what about this back pain, and my daughter has glioma, God forbid, and stuff that we can treat.
I have some stuff I can send you. I've got some videos for you. I'll just give me your email. I'll forward them to you.
Well, here's a quick story about the media and CBD. How many people saw or heard about the original Sanjay Gupta special, where there was the very young woman with epilepsy and CBD immediately took her from hundreds of seizures to none? Anybody remember how that little girl's family heard about CBD and decided to try it? Not from their doctors, not from all the specialists that they went to. They saw it on a TV show called Weed Wars, because that's where the information was. The medical establishment completely failed them. And as Sanjay Gupta himself said, I have to apologize for being part of this disinformation campaign. Now, times that by 1,000,000, and that's the damage that's been done. If that family hadn't seen that one TV show that was able to push that information through all those filters of bullshit, so many people benefited from that. And it's to Sanjay Gupta's credit that he eventually, after in his own words dismissing many people who came up to him and told him their experiences, finally put it on TV and said, I'm a doctor and I'm on CNN, so you should care. But this information was there. Our challenge has always been to get it past these filters. Weed Wars, I'm not even saying it was a very good TV show.
It wasn't.
But there's that opportunity in everything you make to make it matter. And we should. We should live up to that responsibility.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm not kidding about Cannabis for Beginners. I mean, we just did a series of like 20-second videos. We have a lot of, I guess, fans with short attention spans, but really what they're meant for, it's 20 seconds with like the things that everybody in this room probably knows, certainly the people, I mean, just, what's the difference between THC and CBD? Like, what's a dispensary? I mean, just these really simple things. And the idea is, we can't assume that the audience is walking into this conversation with any knowledge, because they have been kept from it and they've been fed misinformation for so long that in some cases it's not just about introducing them to new ideas, it's about changing their minds about preconceived ideas they have that are wrong.
Well said, Katie. That's great. Let's open this up to you folks. We have 10 minutes. Questions, comments, please.
We've done a video on her, by the way. It was great. Yeah.
And people are begging me, because my pride normalizes. It's something they're very common to see, but they're begging me to help them figure out how to navigate anything in cannabis. And you guys, I can't tell you there's no information. And there's nothing in Charleston. There's barely anything out.
There will be soon.
Power. We have no power when I get home. And to look at the industry on both spectrums, you guys are it. You are the ones who are going to help people really save their lives, because they're begging me and I don't know what to tell them, So I just want to say thank you and know that it's a big ripple and it's huge, and those rows in that ripple are what we're all starting to understand and try to speak towards. So thank you.
You are the ripples that become the tsunami. You're the butterfly wing.
Her bongs are really awesome. They're also like bud vases, so you can put flowers in them also.
So, and for a moment, we might talk about what can be done in social media. Not locally, as well as I mean, you have a way of broadcasting, as it were, in your community. You do.
And I'm trying. People say, are you following what's happening in the South? Well, I'm following what's happening here, so I can bring it back there, because they still don't know. They're like, honey, it's not going to come here, so you just wait. You know what? Wait for what? I'm 2 years into this industry with the gorgeous products and trying to help people get help. I never thought I'd be making more things than bongs, but look at what's happening. So I have people grabbing me every week, begging me for information that I know that we need to get to them. And so thank you for saying that, and we are making moves, and please reach those crevices, because there are people that need it.
Well, I'll be getting to those crevices because I'm expanding LA Cannabis News around the country. I'm basically creating like a patch.com literally for cannabis. So I'll be in South Carolina and North Carolina. I'm actually expanding to Denver, Seattle, and the East Coast in July under Cannon Nation.
Boom. So there's a ground level, you're the ground game, and he's going to bring, a sort of a recombination of what's locally happening. A way of rediffusing the information comes from your folks, goes to him, he brings it back to a larger audience. Other questions? Yes, sir.
When do you think Hollywood will start putting weed into their movies and TV shows as much as they do smoking? And right now, you can watch even science fiction shows. They'll be on a spaceship and they're smoking. They've been 3,000 years and they still got the same cigarette package from today. I mean, like, when do we just stop watching people smoking cigarettes and start people lighting up buds or something like that? Does it have to come in a wave, or just right now?
So the question, the second time I've heard it.
I mean, Entourage did it a little bit. Entourage started to do it, but small.
Any Netflix show probably finds somebody smoking. It's hard. Anyway, I'm saying it's really, even if it doesn't make sense, even if it's Avatar, they're smoking. It doesn't make sense why they're smoking.
Right.
Yeah, well, Hollywood
he was
doesn't trade
asking,
in
when are we going to start
subtleties,
seeing smoking, that bit of business that we're so familiar with from movies starting in the 20s. If the director doesn't know what to tell the actor to do, they say, light up a cigarette. And they're still doing it, which is enormously deleterious to kids. But the question is, when will it be pot, not done as a play for laughs?
Well, you're not going to see a lot of it on television because, it's not even just because of kids, it's because of how they make their money. They sell advertising to car companies and pharmaceutical companies and alcohol companies, and most of those companies aren't really interested in the cannabis industry. I mean, Corona they made $200 million investment, but for the most part, if you go to even publishers who are mostly digital, much less the Netflix or the Hollywoods of the world, or the bigger studios, and on the television side specifically, that's a disruption to their business model. So, I think when they can make money on it, that's when it'll change, and they'll be, and we'll lead the way by showing them how it could be done. But you're not going to probably see it overnight. You'll see it in small platforms and growing platforms like ours, normalizing it, showing content, educating people, whatever it might be, and then eventually we'll make content that they'll either want because it's popular, or we'll bring them brands that are willing to spend money against their TV shows, and that'll all sort of, I think, will help.
And by the way, it's not cigarettes, too. I mean, this is part of what we do, is so that when, the FCC comes in and says what we can and can't show, there are obviously many, many other things to do with cannabis other than smoke it. And so I think maybe that what you're going to be looking for is how it gets incorporated into the narrative of all kinds of different stories and platforms. But yeah, we may always be restricted on how, although did you guys see that Showtime did a whole placement deal with PAX? Anybody watching Showtime closely last season? It was there. It was there, and they paid for it.
I know they did Broad City, I think, 2 years ago as well.
Yeah.
They're
so there's little, bits and pieces, but yeah, it may not happen as quickly as you might think.
Yeah.
So, my question is, or my comment is, so Obama, it's not a secret, he used to smoke, right? And someone asked him, so do you inhale? He goes, that's the point, right? And actually, Trump tweeted on his Twitter page, Obama sold me a gram for $35. So with this information and everyone, putting it out there, and these are presidents, people, especially Obama, who is very smart and is at the top of his chain, basically, presidency. What message do you think it sends? And this is, will it be able to present this streamline to positivity? And is there some sort of disconnect? Because people knew Obama smoked, but now they're like, oh. That's one, he's smart, so maybe he's an anomaly to this. What do you think?
You bring up, she brings up an interesting topic, and it'd be interesting to see sort of, Josh, and obviously you worked with somebody who is notable in the space already, but who are going to become sort of our celebrity spokespeople of this industry? Oh,
Obama smoked. Trump made a joke on Twitter about, or not a joke, claimed that Obama sold him a gram, didn't you say, for $35?
Well, when these public figures start sort of talking about their personal use, and I don't know how that's gonna roll out, but we'll start seeing more celebrity voices, more sort of known figures who will come into this industry and try to be the spokesperson for it, whether it be for a brand that they own or whether they're a hired gun. But it will be very interesting to see how that rolls out, because it's about authenticity. I mean, and so many people have spoken that that's the root of this industry, and so just to hire somebody to sort of start promoting, I think it's going to be a challenge.
Yeah, I like that.
That sounds like a non-factual and frankly racist tweet.
Yeah, totally. Big surprise on that. Great.
Thanks, Ryan.
What?
Well, one side of the coin is bullshit. So you show, when the facts are presented clearly, honestly, transparently. When I say I'm an advocacy journalist, I'm doing both. I'm doing what a journalist does. I'm presenting the information as it exists. But the idea that there's two sides to the cannabis debate has never been true. There's the facts, and then there's people who have an agenda to keep cannabis illegal. The facts are not on their side. I'm not saying cannabis is completely harmless. I'm not saying there's not concerns around it, but to take seriously a group of people whose track record for truth is nil and who have propped up 100 years of incredibly damaging public policy, I don't accept that they are good faith actors in this debate. There is not a debate. It's like global warming. okay? You can find people that you can pay to say anything, and there's a certain number of people who believe things without a factual basis for believing them, but that's not a debate.
False equivalence. You know the expression. One last. Yes, sir.
All the media outlets that primarily cover cannabis as their content, I assume that would be supported by some sort of revenue stream. What sort of challenges have you faced finding sponsors and finding other people who will fund your media ventures?
Well, I think on the content side, the biggest challenge from a brand sponsor, whether they're buying pre-roll or they're integrating, is that they don't have ubiquitous distribution, right? So if you're in California right now, and even if you're in California, maybe you're in 5 dispensaries, maybe you're in 20 dispensaries. So I think over the next 18 to 24 months, you're going to see state by state these brands sort of try and get everywhere. Yep. And then when they're everywhere, they're going to try and gain more market share, and that means more content and more advertising and sort of any traditional product. That's on the adult use side. And then I think on the medical side, I think once the FDA gets involved, it's going to change a lot of things. And I think that you're going to have to, if you're going to take sort of the medical money, whatever you want to call it, it's going to be almost like pharma advertising, and there'll be all kinds of fun disclaimers and challenges around there. So
I think that was a great question because
yeah, exactly.
I think that was a great question, and I think a critical media consumer should pay attention to, is this a cannabis-only publication? Do they never say literally anything critical about anything having to do with any cannabis company or policy or anything like that? Maybe this isn't the most honest and truthful and fact-based piece of media.
Yeah, that's why we don't do anything with news, because we're not here to.
Yeah, exactly. Us too. That's why it's like lifestyle versus journalism.
I actually just got hit up by Beverly Hills BMW this past week. So, there you go.
I'll say for myself, and I don't want to speak for my co-creator on the podcast, but I know it's true. Between the two of us, we've worked with the biggest media companies specific to cannabis. I was with High Times for a long time. We both worked with Vice, which is not specific to cannabis. We decided to start this podcast because we wanted to make something that we could control ourselves. If we can make it big enough to support ourselves, then we can turn it into what we want. And quite frankly, working with media companies in any capacity is frustrating and difficult and compromising. And what I would like to see across the board is more power put in the hands of actual creators, and our response to that is, we can make this ourselves and compete with other podcasts. I can't make a platform myself and compete with Prohibited and Civilized, and the work you're doing is great. But for me, that is the answer, to try to make something that we can control ourselves, make the content that appeals to us, trust it'll appeal to other people, and as the legality changes, the opportunity to, I hate the word monetize that, is growing as well. And anybody who wants to talk more about monetizing my podcast, I will be available directly after this.
The new channel. Okay, well, we only had 45 minutes for this. I want to thank Katie and David and Amanda and Alex and Josh and Brian, and thank you all.